The bulk of information in any documentary comes from interviews. Because of this, thorough preparation of your crew, your talent, and your location is crucial to getting your documentary story told.
Among all the craziness that goes into making documentaries, interviews can actually be the easiest, most informative, and fun parts to do. Of course, that's only if you start off right. So to help you get off on the right foot, we'll show you what equipment you'll need, give you some tips on how to make a room look great, what you should include in your talent releases, and how to make sure your subjects look great on screen as well. Lastly, we'll dig deeper into subject appearance by showing you how to get good subject positioning, what kinds of clothing work well for the screen, and how to overcome facial and lighting problems with makeup.
The key to any good shoot is having the right equipment. Since it's better to be safe than sorry, it's always a good idea to check your camera, audio, and lighting gear the night before the shoot to ensure it's working properly. There's nothing worse than showing up on a shoot with broken equipment. It's also a good idea to make a checklist with the equipment that you'll need for the interview. This way, you can be sure you have all the equipment before you leave your studio. Amongst your equipment, you'll want to bring a lavalier microphone to capture audio. These kinds of microphones are small enough to let the subject forget that they're even being recorded, which helps them to feel more relaxed and open when speaking in front of the camera. It's also good to consider what lights you'll be using for the shoot. Since incandescent bulbs can heat up a room rather quickly, it's a good idea to use lamps that produce less heat, such as fluorescents or LED lights. Though they're more expensive, they can stay on longer and will help your subject feel more comfortable. Lastly, since cameras are often intimidating to interview subjects, you want to back your camera off from your subject as far as your zoom lens will allow. This gives your subject more room, gives the shot a shallower depth of field, and makes your subject a bit less nervous, which can lead to better interviews.
Of all the factors in an interview setup, the room appearance can be the most nerve-wracking. However, room appearance says volumes about the character of your interview subject. Because of this, arriving at least an hour early to any interview is a great idea. This will give you the time to discuss any changes that the room needs with owners, and to set up lighting before the interview begins. This will also be the time to close the shades or apply CTO gels to windows for lighting purposes, turning off lamps and overhead lighting, and to move chairs and tables to get more room for your equipment. Also, if you want to highlight props or areas of the room, you'll want to make sure you have smaller light fixtures with barn doors so you can give the objects the attention they need. Now, if you don't have much setup time, using a camera and lens that can get a very shallow depth of field is really helpful. With it, you can simply knock the background out of focus, which draws attention to your subject and covers up any mistakes the room may have.
Staying legal in documentaries can save you from losing your money and your reputation, so signed talent releases are a must. These releases should be written by a media lawyer and should include at minimum the name of your subject, the subject contact information, the title of your project, what kind of compensation will be given to the talent, where you'll be using the footage, and of course, a signature from both the subject and the filmmaker. It's also generally easier to get this signed before the interview takes place, since subjects can sometimes get nervous if it's done afterward.
The last factor you'll want to consider before an interview begins is your subject's appearance. Interview subjects are almost always apprehensive about being on camera to begin with, so you'll want to consider ways to make your subject look better on screen by positioning them correctly, making sure they are wearing camera-friendly clothing, and applying makeup when needed. Unless your subject is directly addressing the audience, it's a good idea to have them looking a bit to the left or right of the camera's lens. Subjects tend to feel most comfortable and relaxed talking to a person rather than a piece of equipment, so make sure you have someone standing with their eyes at the same level as the camera. At the same time, you'll want to frame your subject in such a way that they have looking room. This means that subjects should be either on the left or right third of the frame, looking in the opposite direction.
The next factor to consider is clothing. You'll want to instruct your subjects not to wear pure white, black, or yellow clothing, since they tend to be too bright, dark, or saturated. Also, thin stripes and tight patterns can cause rainbow-like moire to appear on the screen. Lastly, if it's possible for a subject to take off sunglasses or prescription glasses, that can help you to see their eyes better and avoid reflecting light back to the camera lens.
Lastly, you'll want to consider using makeup if your subject's skin is shiny or has visible defects. A bit of powder can go a long way in making skin appear less shiny, and having different colors of foundation can help cover skin defects. You can also use diffusion filters and higher angles to make wrinkles less visible. Using tools like these makes sure that every subject looks great on screen, and they're happy with your product.
Though there's a lot of work required to any good documentary interview, it's always worth the effort. By doing so, you'll ensure a relaxed subject, a good shot, and a compelling documentary.
Unless you're a born investigative reporter, quality interview answers are about as scarce as water in a desert. However, interviews are the heart of any documentary. So by learning how to get emotional and descriptive answers from your subjects, you can make a documentary worth watching.
Some interviews can be more nerve-wracking for the director than it is for the talent, but it doesn't have to be. With a little preparation and knowledge, it can actually be one of the most thrilling parts of making a documentary. To help you get prepared, we're going to show you what to include when briefing your talent, how to ask quality questions, and good ways to respond to questions that will get you the sound bites that you need.
The first thing you'll want to do in any interview is brief your talent. The talent is the most important part of the interview, so making sure they know the topic of the conversation gives you a better chance at getting a relaxed subject and a good interview. Every interview should be treated like a conversation, so asking your talent how their day's been going, if they have any questions about the interview, and if they need anything to drink are great ways to make them feel comfortable and ready to talk. However, during the briefing, make sure that your talent doesn't start answering the same questions that will be given in the interview. Rarely is a repeated answer as good as the first one. Once your talent is in front of the camera, it's your job to make them look and speak naturally. Make sure to tell your talent to speak with you instead of the camera, and reassure them that any mistakes they might make can be taken out in the editing room.
Every interviewer dreams of getting that one emotional and informational response that gives a documentary its meaning. All that starts, though, by asking the right kinds of questions. Leading questions that can be answered with a simple yes or no are the most common mistakes that amateur interviewers make. Here's an example.
Do you like surfing?
Yeah.
And you've been doing it for a long time, right?
Yeah, about 10 years.
Is there anything else you like to do besides surfing?
No, not really.
Unless you plan on having the interviewer's voice as part of the documentary, these answers will be too short and detached to derive any real meaning. Instead, asking open-ended questions that start with how, why, where, or what will force your subject to be more descriptive with their responses. Here's an example of the same interviewer using open-ended questions.
So what do you like about surfing?
Oh, it's like being a part of something big, you know? Like, you're surfing and you're on the waves, you're on top of it. You're on top of the whole ocean. That's what it feels like to me, like I'm part of this whole ecosystem.
How long have you been surfing?
For about 10, 13 years, whatever it's been. Like, my aunt gave me a shortboard when I was young, and so I just started skimming waves, and I just fell in love with floating on top of the water.
What would you do if you weren't surfing?
Dude, like, surfing's life. If I didn't have this, I wouldn't have life.
In order to be sure you get what you need, it's a good idea to write out a question list. This list should be written in a logical order that eases your talent into the topic you want them to discuss. Ask the most benign and simple questions first. Then, once you've built some rapport with them, gradually ask more complex questions until you come to the heart of what you want them to say. Here's an example of that method in action.
Hi, how you doing? What have you been up to lately?
You know, I've just been enjoying my trip up in Northern Cali. Like, normally I stick to the beach, but it's been cool to get some sun like this.
Why do you enjoy surfing so much?
Oh, you know, surfing on top of the waves is awesome because you're the master of the ocean and you're really over all the creatures in the sea. It's really cool.
I'm sure surfing has its dangers. What kinds of things have you seen?
Yeah, so, like, there's always a chance of jellyfish getting out there and stinging you, and that can numb up, like, a whole leg at a time. But the real danger are the sharks, man, because you get in their territory, you know, drop a little scent of blood, and they're on top of you. Like my buddy Evan, he had to deal with one the other day.
So, what were your first thoughts when you saw your friend getting attacked?
Oh man, when Evan was there, I was like, I don't want to be right where he is. Like, no one wants to be there, man. But it's just like, just as a big reminder, check to reality, to know that there's that other balance of power out there in the ocean. You just got to respect it.
It's also good to develop 3 or 4 themes for your subject to touch on, and write a few questions down for each one. Just don't get so enamored with your question list that you don't let yourself delve deeper into a subject's personal moment. Lastly, you'll want to end the interview by asking your subject if there's anything else they want to say or didn't feel was adequately covered. This will sometimes provide a very powerful or personal response that can greatly enhance your documentary.
As important as asking the right questions is, listening can be just as important. An interview should be a two-way conversation, so interviewers should feel free to respond to what a subject is saying. This can keep the energy level of your subject high and can lead to a more natural-sounding interview. Of course, not all feedback is verbal. Nonverbal feedback through eye contact, head nodding, smiles, and head gestures can help to elicit emotional responses as well. Also, make sure that you don't step on the toes of your subject. Wait for them to finish speaking before you ask another question. Werner Herzog, a famous documentarian, does this very well in many of his documentaries. Here's an example.
And with the bear. Ultimately, she stayed with the bear in the situation.
Awkward silences like these encourage your subject to expand on their answer and let them determine the direction of the conversation. Now, interviews don't have to be a lot of work. In fact, with adequate preparation and the knowledge we've given, your documentary interview should be the most fun and relaxing part of your production.